I got knocked off. Good evening, everyone. This is Mayor Shawyn Patterson Howard. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Sundays with Shawyn. Tonight, we have a very serious discussion that we're about to have. We are asking that you please take a moment to share this video or start a watch party. Tonight, we will be discussing the 2021 budget. As you know, many of you know, on Wednesday, I unveiled our 2021 proposed budget. And there's been a lot of discussion, concern, fear, anxiety around the budget as the budget talks about cuts to services, elimination of positions, potential furloughs and layoffs. Well, furloughs or layoffs. And so at this time, we're asking that you please take out a moment to share this video. This is probably one of the most crucial conversations that we will be having as a community. And we want to make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can. Tonight, I have joining with me in this discussion, Dr. Darren Morton. He serves as my chief of staff here in the city of Mount Vernon. Dr. Morton has been working in the city of Mount Vernon since 2012, I believe. 2012, correct, Dr. Morton?
That
since
is correct.
2012. Can you just give the community an update on, well, a little bit of your background, even before coming to Mount Vernon, so they understand the level of professional that you are in the totality of your career?
Okay, well, thank you. I started at the city of Mount Vernon in 2012 under Ernie Davis, and was mayor as the recreation commissioner. Prior to that, I had served for over 20 years in higher education. And before actually going into higher education, I served as a math teacher in high school. For 20 years, I served students at two different universities. My last post at the St. John's University was as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, in which I managed the division's budget and also supervised over 100 staff members. Throughout that time, also, I served as the director of the Vincentian Institute for Social Action, which was a community-based learning experiential program in which we developed community initiatives with not-for-profit organizations. And so throughout those years, I learned how to, as an executive, to manage people, to manage budgets, and to also implement new creative initiatives, transforming organizations. What I did not know is that because of the several different temporary posts that I also served in at the university, that I had received the reputation of being the cleanup man, going into departments and really transforming the departments, making sure that we were ensuring that there was a clear balance of a workflow, that the budgets were right-sized, and that the financials were operating well. So outside of my professional career, I've also served on several different not-for-profit boards, and even a few years ago, I served as a trustee for the Mount Vernon Public Library, in which I chaired the the finance committee for 3 of the 4 years that I served there, and then the last year serving in the personnel committee. And so I say all of that to say that I have an extensive background in executive leadership, in financial management, in human service management. And lastly, I served as a adjunct professor for the Masters of Public Administration program at College of New Rochelle before they closed.
Thank you so much. I just wanted you to provide some of that background and history because, you know, are my chief of staff, and you have been one of the primary persons working with me in the creation and the development of this budget.
And this is not probably because most people think of me just as the pastor of Macedonia. So we need to
Absolutely.
know.
Absolutely. So oftentimes people don't realize the vast experience that we come and bring to these offices, and don't understand the totality of our experience. Um, Working on the 2021 budget is not something that we just started to do in the last month. We met with all of our commissioners, as we do monthly, back in June, and we asked them to, by August, have to us their wish list, have to us their projected revenues, their expenses, their staffing patterns, and really to create their departmental budgets. And they all handed in their departmental budgets by the end of August. After that, we continued to reach out then to the comptroller and get her input on revenues and expenses that we don't necessarily manage on the departmental level. And we received some information starting in late October that we were able to plug in some holes. We continued to ask for information throughout the end of the year, and some was forthcoming, some not. And we received information as late as January 12th to help us plug in some final numbers, especially around healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, and things of that nature. So that is how we prepared, and we presented our final budget that we presented on Wednesday. So we are here today to take a walk through the budget, the budgeting process, some of the challenges that we are facing, some of the very hard decisions that we have to make, and that we will be presenting at our public hearing on this Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m. So with that said, Malcolm, can you please put up the first slide? So this is our budget in a very simple form. We have a budget allocation of $122,367,186. As you can see, the three major areas of the budget for the city of Mount Vernon are salaries, which is 50% of our budget, benefits, which is 40% of our budget, and appropriations, or what they call in other places other than personnel services, equipment, supplies, minimal travel in this budget, and things of that nature, other contracts that we use to operate the day-to-day functions of our departments. So as you can see, this is,
yeah, they would call, right. And so for some other folks to know that they would call that direct cost, right? Those are the kind of the direct expenses, not dealing with the actual personnel or what they would call overhead. So the overhead expenses could also would include your personnel, would include the benefits for your personnel, but also it would also include those indirect expenses, such as things like your insurance premiums and things of that sort, to make sure. So these are what the operation costs that the various departments would use in order to really function outside of the things that are related to the personnel or the things that are related to those indirect costs that you need in order to mitigate things like risk and all of those kinds of things. I just want to say that.
So clearly you can see that our greatest expenses come in direct costs, like, well, in personnel costs and benefits. That's 90% of the budget. As a local government, we are very much a service-oriented organization. And so we are very people-driven, and thus the expenses are primarily in support of salaries and benefits. As you see, the direct costs are only 10%, and that is a very thin margin. But that is the margin that we are operating and functioning here in the city of Mount Vernon. It might look different in other places, but our costs here in Mount Vernon are very much service-driven and people-driven. So,
and typically, even in service organizations, and and as I said before, I've worked for not-for-profits for the majority of my career, and in creating a budget, a 90% is definitely outside of the margin. It is definitely an anomaly. right? For you to have that high of a percentage that is non-direct cost. Typically, you could be somewhere between 25 and 20 percent that you would be utilizing as your operating costs. And so, what that says to us is that yes, we are spending a good portion of our money in the personnel, but we also understand that given the fact that Mount Vernon it has a very thin, organizational structure. It's a much more flat operation management model than you will find in some of our counterparts. And you can look at New Rochelle and Yonkers and White Plains and other areas, and you can talk about comparative cities, and you'll probably see that the hierarchy and the structure is much more of a vertical kind of structure rather than as flat as it is. Let's face it, in many of the departments, and you'll see that when you start to look and drive into the specific operational costs and the staffing in areas like your human resources that is managing over 700 employees where you have 2 people in it, right? So in other words, you got the departments that don't have bench. They don't have somebody to pull from. And so, yeah, you know what? You're going to have to ensure that those people are being paid appropriately in order to do the job that normally you might have 2 or 3 other people working.
And like you said, I've run not-for-profit organizations for most of my career, been in an executive level, overseeing and managing budgets and audits for over 20 years. And yes, as you say, the direct costs, or the OTPS, as we often call them as well, is usually around 20 to 25%. But as you've already stated, because we operate with such a flat structure, because you're saying that very nice. We are very thinly staffed. We are very thinly staffed. There's just not any bloat. There's no bloat in our budgeting. And there's no bloat in our appropriations as well, which causes great challenge. We have a very thin margin for which we operate here in the city. And we'll look at some of the declining revenues that we've experienced over the years, which causes us to operate so thinly. When you have declining revenues and no area where we're really growing the revenues, we're just replacing the revenues that we're losing. That's a real challenge. And thus, here in Mount Vernon, having 90% of our expenses being salaries and benefits. All right, so we can move on to the next slide. So here we have really the major areas of revenue that we have here for the city of Mount Vernon. These are revenue areas that are more than $499,000 a year. The yellow being 2018, the gray being 2019, orange 2020, and blue 2021. As you see, there are some areas that are really consistent for the most part, but there are some areas in 2021 where we have received some decreases. That is definitely driving some of the revenue challenges and shortfalls that we are having at this time. So the cable franchise fee, that's really monies that we receive from Verizon and Comcast to do business here in the city of Mount Vernon. We have the Urban Renewal Agency, that's a sewer grant, so you don't see that in other years, but that's new revenue that we were able to put in to take care of some of our shortfalls. New York State CHIPS grant, we put revenue in there of about $1 million, well, actually exactly $1 million. Our mortgage tax has been pretty steady over the past 2 years as budgeted. And so that's an area that we've been able to count on. Now, if we look at this next area, the per capita state revenue sharing, this is money that we receive from the state of New York as a local municipality. And if you look, 2018, 2019, 2020, very steady. But there's a significant decline in the blue line in 2021. And that is due to COVID. We received the notification from the state executive chamber that due to their revenue shortfalls, in 2020 and expected in 2021, that they would be reducing our per capita revenue sharing funding by 20%. And that is a real impact to us locally, over $1.4 million. And while that may not sound large in the scope of a $122 million budget, it is significant. The other area where we've experienced some decline is the transfer from the water department net earnings. That's a number that was just budgeted pretty much arbitrarily for the last probably 10 years, just at $1 million, but not necessarily taking into account what the real expenses or the audited expenses of that department is. And so this year we have budgeted it at a lower number of $850,000 as opposed to anywhere between $1 million and $1.4 million. Sales of real property is an area where we have really are pushing some of the revenue. The city of Mount Vernon owns some significant commercial properties here. And we are concerned in a time where we have declining revenues in other areas, that if we hold on to properties that we don't have municipal use for, that we would have to lay off even more people or find other ways to cut. And so we have budgeted in here for the fair market sale of several properties, commercial properties that we have here in the city of Mount Vernon that we already have buyers for and bids for. Fines and forfeited bail and criminal court fines, a decrease in that revenue sharing area, in that revenue area. As we know, the courts have not been open, and we are seeing a serious decline in monies expected to come in from the courts. And so there is a significant loss there. Street opening fees and permits, we expect that to stay pretty stable. We saw an increase in 2019 and 2020. We expect to see an increase in those revenues, or a stabilization in those revenues for 2021. Building and alteration permits, we have a small decline in that area. With COVID, not as many people are coming to the building department proposing renovations in their home. People are trying to stabilize their expenses in our homes, so we are seeing that impact here. Rental of real property, we do have property here in Mount Vernon, homes that we foreclosed on right now that are being rented, and there is real revenue that comes from that area, and so we will continue that. Police department, Con Ed, and movies. As you can see, Con Ed is doing a lot of tearing up of the streets here in Mount Vernon as they do gas and electric upgrades throughout our city. So we expect to see stabilization in that area. Parking meter and permit fees. That is a number that had been budgeted, I believe, at about $3.5 million for the past few years. And as we've dug down into those numbers, those are not realistic numbers. And so we have decreased revenue in that area, I believe, in excess of $350,000. Real property transfer taxes. That's when people buy property here in Mount Vernon, a lot of it residential, some of it commercial. There is a property tax transfer that has to be paid. The value of a lot of our homes have gone up, and there are people because of COVID who are moving from more urban areas like New York City and looking to move into the suburbs and purchase homes. So we have a really strong housing market right now, and so we are projecting increased revenues in that area. Our franchise taxes, we are looking at a decrease in some of our franchise taxes, and that is primarily Con Ed. There's about a $900,000 decline in revenues from Con Ed in our franchise taxes. Utilities staying the same. Net proceeds from sales and sales tax, we are predicting a very small increase in sales tax revenues. We pretty much met our sales tax projection goals for 2020, even in the midst of COVID, with many of our retail stores being closed down for 2.5 months. We saw a really strong rebound in purchasing and sales tax revenue in July, August, September, and throughout the end of the year. And we anticipate with the businesses opening, with the vaccines coming, that we will continue to see sales tax growth. Interest and penalties on real property and taxes. We are seeing a decline in that area. Is that, I just want to make sure that's the right one, that is based on the schools, right? Based on school taxes?
No. That's
Okay, I'm wrong on that one.
interest and penalties on real property tax. Well, some of it I think would have related at that point to that, but I think that for the most part, it's about our own city taxes.
It's the city taxes. So, that's stable. That's pretty much a stable number. Pretty stable. Payment in lieu of taxes, those are the pilots. That number we expect to be stable. And gain on sale of tax acquired properties. We are budgeting for a slight increase in gain on sales of tax acquired properties. And what those are, Mount Vernon does own outright properties that we foreclosed on and that were not sold in our 2016 auction, which is the last time the city of Mount Vernon had an auction. We are looking to put those properties up for sale, 1, 2, 3 family residential homes, some smaller commercial lots that we are looking to also sell. And so we're looking for a slight increase in that revenue area. Chief Morton, do you have any other comments on these?
Yeah, I think to want to try to provide some context to this in a very general sense, right? And so the mayor articulated that it is our assessment that the revenues have been traditionally overstated. In many cases, and this information we gleaned based upon some of the actuals that we received from the comptroller related to 2019, and it was 3 quarters of information. It was up until September, right, of 2019. And what we did is try to project and do a projection based upon the trends of the revenues and the expenditures up to September 30th of 2019 for what it would be for the rest of the year. And based upon that, not taking 2020 as being an anomaly year because of COVID, we then made these kinds of adjustments and came to the conclusion that some of these revenues that have been projected for years are overstated. And so you take that with the challenge of this administration to bring down the revenues to a more reasonable figure without gutting out the services from various departments. It's a hard balancing act. And so we've been as conservative as we could possibly be with the revenues without really just eliminating services in many of the areas. Now take that and couple that with that the state told us that they're going to drop us 20%, right, in our shared revenue from them, right? Then you take that and you couple it with the fact that and we'll talk about it in more detail later, but that our property valuation has dropped significantly, about $2 million there. We'll talk about the expenses that went up in a few moments. But if you look at these large areas, and the reason why we highlighted the ones that are $1 million and up, because those are the ones that are your budget drivers, right? Anybody who understands the budgeting, those are the ones that are going to have the greatest of impact if they are off the mark. Now, what is this going to mean for next year for us? For me as the chief of staff, the mayor as the chief executive officer, the comptroller as the chief fiscal officer, and our budget chairs in the city council, it's going to mean that we're going to have to monitor whatever budget is ultimately approved very carefully. And so, yes, critical data on a monthly or quarterly basis about how we are trending, right? Monthly, the mayor says,
Monthly.
how we are trending is going to be critical, because it's going to require for potential budget modifications and things that saw transfers that occur within the budget, right, itself on the administrative side, as well as gleaning some information about what possibly will be any surplus, any additional cash that is available, that we know nothing about at this point. So that's what we're dealing with. So I want you to make sure that you understand that we really took hours to look at this and try to figure out how could we best serve the residents of Mount Vernon and come up with a responsible budget as best as we can with the information that we have. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There are probably changes that are going to need to be made. Absolutely. And we're going to hear more from the public as well as from our council and from the comptroller as we move forward. So I wanted to highlight that because these are important items for us to understand. And let me last thing. And next year, there are going to have to be some additional adjustments too, because this is a process of right sizing a budget for the city, and also trying to avail. The mayor said it earlier, and I want to make sure I emphasize it. We're going to have to try to identify new revenue streams to help with the budget this year and going forward.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide, Malcolm.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the fact that salaries are 50% of the budget, we just wanted to give the public an understanding of how that even breaks down by service area. And so we see that big 64% right there. That is public safety. That is the combination of our police department and our fire department. Public safety is always the biggest concern in any community, and in any community, public safety is always the biggest investment. And so the police and fire department attribute for 64% of the salary expenditures here in the city of Mount Vernon. The next largest driver is 17%, and that is our Department of Public Works. So that's sanitation, street cleaning, cleaning of parks, highways, potholes, lighting, repairs all throughout the city, maintenance of city buildings and property and grounds, and also deals with, some of the public health and sanitary conditions, our sewers, all of those things. So that is the Department of Public Works. After that, I guess the next biggest department would be recreation. And the recreation would be the next biggest department. I think that is, what is that other green one? Yeah, really recreation. The mayor's department is about 1%. The city clerk's department is about 1%. Youth bureau, 1%. Planning department, 1%. So really the rest of the city outside of public safety and the Department of Public Works is 19%. So everything else in the city of Mount Vernon, all of the other departments, is about 19% of the budget. So again, outside of public safety and public works, we are a very thinly organized city, not having a lot of depth, not having a lot of bench, as you've already stated, Dr. Morton, to operate the city on. And so we just wanted people to understand and have a visual. Really, our day-to-day salary, if you look at salaries by department, it has that $60,658,899 number. And when you look at 261 work days of the year, that attributes for a daily payroll in the city of Mount Vernon of about $232,000. And that is a very important number to remember as we go forward.
I think that there's some questions I think there were some questions in someone.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next piece for a second really quickly. So because we have a shortfall, because we have a $2 million devaluation in our revenues in our property, because we've lost over $1.5 million in revenue in the state, because we've had to downgrade expected revenues from parking, from franchise fees, from other taxes, we are looking, and because we've had some increased expenditures, we are looking at the option of furloughs and layoffs in order to help us balance out our budget and maintain a livable and reasonable tax increase. About 2 months ago, as we were preparing the budget and we were very much in the thick of working on our budget, we had a press conference and we spoke about the fact that we were facing potentially a doomsday situation here, and that would be a double-digit tax increase or about a 20 to 25% potential reduction in services. And when I said that, people said, "Oh, that's just not possible. That can't happen." But if any of us have honestly looked at the news for the past 6 months in the midst of COVID, we have to realize that all across the country, this is what cities and governments are speaking about, from local towns and villages to cities to states to the federal government. We are experiencing challenges with our revenues and looking at how we're going to make those up and continue to manage our cities. So the United States Conference of Mayors, I just want to put this into context. 88% of cities across the country are experiencing revenue challenges due to COVID-19 shortfalls. Cities with populations of anything between 50,000 and 500,000, 98% of those cities are experiencing revenue shortfalls. 55% of those same cities are expecting to lay off or furlough workers. 55% are expecting to have to furlough workers. 38% are looking to have to lay off workers. And of all of those, they're also saying that 52% of those communities will have to lay off or furlough public safety. And so Mount Vernon is not unique. We are right in trend. We are right on point with communities large and small all across the United States. So when we are having this conversation around layoffs versus furloughs, we really need people to understand this is not political. It's not punitive. It's not popular. This is not a popular thing to do. This is not going to gain me any votes. But it is practical, and it is the hard decisions that we have to make so that our city does not run off a financial cliff. So.
Malcolm, can you pull that furlough layoff slide back up for a moment? Because I think that it's important. There's been a lot of conversation, and we met with the union leaders earlier this week. We know that there's been a number of conversations going on among the staff. There is some trepidation, there's some fear, there's some confusion, there's some misinformation that is being spewed out about what this means and where we are and why. First of all, we are, again, the mayor and I both are service-oriented people. So we've worked for a while, right, with people. We've worked for people. And so we don't ever want to do something that's going to drastically harm our folks because we know that they're dedicated workers. Unfortunately, we had a situation where we've got to make some tough decisions about how we move forward. Furloughs, meaning that, again, people are mandated to kind of take this unpaid kind of period of time, right? And what does that mean as it pertains to their benefits? It means that actually they are entitled to their benefits and the continuation of that. And so for the employees, right, it's a matter of them agreeing to take a certain amount of time. We proposed that it was 15 days in which they take that they would not get paid for, right? And how you do that is something that we would have to discuss, right? And some of that could be even placed in the hands of, or as the responsibility, the authority of the actual department head or commissioner as to how they do it. At the end of the day, it's about the dollar amount that has to be reduced from the budget. in order to balance out the budget, right? The mechanics around how you actually roll out the furlough is something that we can continue to talk about with the union, the union reps, the staff, department heads, in order to make sure that it has the least amount of impact. The opposite of that, of course, is layoffs. And you're going to hear more details about that later on as to this very specifics about it. But clearly, the layoffs have a direct impact to families beyond just the dollars that they will lose in the salary for a prescribed amount of time. It's a permanency of laying people off. And yes, there's some that actually at some levels that they may be able to get, that they will get unemployment, and that some cases the unemployment may actually balance out to help them, and it may be better in some cases in what they are getting from the city if they are at the low stratosphere of the salary scale. But for others, no, right? And so it does have a greater impact upon the livelihood of the people in our community than furloughs. Not to say that furloughs it doesn't have that impact. It has some impact, but the bang, right, is not quite as poignant.
So one of the questions I know that has been posed on Facebook and since Wednesday is, what would the furloughs look like? We are talking about 15 days worth of furloughs. We're not talking about 15 straight days. We're really looking for people to give back 6 hours per paycheck between the March and December. We feel that is the most digestible way to do that. To put someone out of work for 15 days straight is a big impact to city services, but it's also a big impact to their income to take care of their homes. We already know that it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get unemployment. So by the time we're looking to bring them back to work, they will have already lost several weeks of pay, and then they'll be coming back. How do they make that up when it comes to their ongoing bills? And so the proposal, the easiest and the most digestible way to recapture that 15 days, which comes out to 120 hours, is 12 hours a month, which would be 6 hours of pay out of each paycheck, except the month that we have 3 paychecks between March and December. There was a question, and you can put some of the questions up, but one of the questions that I've already seen is, well, why did you hire a police class, or why did you send people to the Academy for Fire back in September? And now, so we did not hire 2 classes of police officers. We hired 1 class of police officers back in December. We have seen major badge drain here in the city of Mount Vernon. We had over 27 people retire or transfer out to other departments. And so in December, the projections that we had at that time were not as grim as they are now. The fire class that we brought on, we had over 18 positions available in the fire department. And while there was a savings in salaries, there was a great over expenditure in overtime, because when you have that level of openings, a beginning firefighter makes $40,000 a year. When you're paying overtime, most likely you're paying overtime on someone who's making $60,000 a year up to $89,000 to $90,000 a year in the fire department. The same thing that happens in the police. And so we had to fill critical staffing holes. And again, the information that we had in September when we brought on a fire class, and the information we had in December when we brought on a class of police probationary officers was very different. We are in a very volatile environment. Unfortunately, we do not have the transparency and the partnership that we need. And I don't want to make this personal, coming out of our fiscal office. And so there are some unfortunate decisions. There is a lack of information, real-time information, and some of the information that we got that brought us to this place of furloughs and layoffs, honestly, really just came on Tuesday. We were able to balance some of the revenues that we knew we were losing. We were able to, inject and put in some city properties for sale, whether they were commercial or residential. We were able to look at increasing property transfer taxes, pilot revenue, things of that nature. We were able to identify and fill some of the shortfalls. Malcolm, if you can put up the slide that talks about the benefits, the increase in expenditures, especially I believe around the
But I think,
benefits.
Mayor, before you do that, I think that there was, so you had put up a question, Malcolm, but then you took it back down because I think that that was a critical question. So it's about the cash reserves and cash on hand, right? And so that information, of course, would come from the comptroller's office as to what the specifics are. And in this budget, I mean, at the end of the day, when we were looking to try to figure out how to balance it, the budget assumption. And here's the thing, right? The budget assumption is that there has to be some sort of cash reserve that's there. The comptroller is saying that we are actually utilizing some of the cash reserve now in doing that. So we don't have any specific numbers as to what is available or not. However, the budget assumption would be in this budget is that we would be able to utilize some of that to be able to kind of balance that until we get some very clear, accurate documentation that would tell us otherwise we would not be able to tell you specifically what is in the cash reserve, what is cash available on hand at this thing that of course we welcome and we would love to have from the comptroller specifically to be able to kind of balance this. Our hope is that the comptroller would be able to find that there is some cash reserve in order to be able to eliminate some of the furloughs or the layoffs that we are proposing, or to make some other changes in that. Again, and I think that was from Mr. Cullen. I mean, that budgeting is not a clear science. I mean, you've got it's volatile. It works as the numbers come in and what you have in front of you, and so that's what we're doing to try to balance that, to move it forward, but trying to be responsible and conservative in doing that.
And being, you said responsible and conservative, but also realistic. You cannot budget for what you do not have in front of you. And so while we hope and we wish that we have a certain level of reserves, that is not information that we have available to us. And so if we find later that we have more money, if we find that President Biden is going to send money to the state, if we find that the state of New York is going to replace some of the funding that they cut from us, then we can make other adjustments. We can reduce number of furlough days depending on what types of revenue comes in. But what we cannot do right now, what we do know is that DPW, fire, and police have not been paid a lot of their overtime since October. The comptroller says she has no money to pay it. What we do know is that our medical premiums for every employee here in the city of Mount Vernon, we are $7.1 million behind in payment of our medical premiums to the state of New York at this time. What we do know is that in 2020, $4 million of payments to our vendors who we receive services for have not been made. So these are things that we know. We know 7 million behind in payments for our medical, 4 million behind in payments for our vendors, that's $11 million, and not sure what the overtime for police, fire, and DPW comes to that has not been paid. So we cannot continue to incur overtime. We cannot continue to budget for what we don't know that we have. And right now, we want to make sure that we're able to make payroll, because honestly, Mount Vernon, and this is the God's honest truth, and while it might sound crazy, it is very true. We have so limited information that at any time, the comptroller can come to us and say, we're not going to make payroll on that Friday. because she has not been transparent. We do not have access to the information. This past week, I just got more access to 2 other bank accounts, and the 3 bank accounts that I have visual viewing access to, in those 3 combined bank accounts, what I can see is $633,000. That is 2 days worth of salary expenses. That's 2 days worth of salary for the city of Mount Vernon. And so we can talk about what should happen and what we would like to happen, but right now, with the realities that we are dealing with, we have to make some very hard decisions based on the information that we do have with the budget assumptions that we can make. This is not smoke and mirrors. There's been a very big Ponzi game played over the years with the budget, as we've said, over projecting of revenues and underestimation of expenses. And we are at some very, very real brick walls. We are between a rock and a rock. The one thing that I can say is I've been very proud to lead this incredible staff over this past year. We did not know before 100 days in office that COVID was going to hit us locally. It devastated our workforce. We are so proud of our staff who showed up every day in the midst of a pandemic, who went into homes where they knew people were COVID positive and had to provide medical assistance, had to go in and deal with domestic violence or public safety issues. Our DPW workers picking up waste and garbage, from homes where people were living with COVID. And our workers being so heavily impacted by COVID themselves. There were times where we had 25 police or fire and people out in DPW in our larger departments at one time, and people filling in, still making sure that we were able to put out fires, still making sure that we worked to keep the public safe, still making sure that we were picking up increased numbers of garbage because people were staying home from school and from work. So be very clear. We understand clearly the sacrifices made by the employees of the city of Mount Vernon. We understand them and appreciate them more than the residents, some who only see what they don't like, as opposed to seeing how much we are trying to do with very limited resources. We know that our employees here in Mount Vernon are underpaid more than any municipality in the area. And that's why we understand that we don't want to do layoffs. Furloughs are going to affect us from this office, from where I sit. I'll give back 15 days of pay, all the way down to our frontline staff, commissioners, supervisors, captains, lieutenants, and everything in between. But if the option is layoffs, it is definitely going to impact city services. That's one of the questions that we saw put up there. Will layoffs and will furloughs impact city services? Furloughs will impact city services to a minimal, and we will not be utilizing overtime to replace and plug in those days. We have asked our fire department, our police department leadership, as well as our DPW leadership, because those are the departments that will be most impacted, to work on alternative operational plans, where we will have to flatten those departments even more. Collapsing in police, maybe some of our specialty units, and the same thing in DPW, and in fire, different operational plans. We're looking at different operational plans for furlough, and we're looking at alternative operational plans for layoffs. I can tell you this, in an already under-resourced, understaffed city, that layoffs are definitely going to have a much greater impact on the services that we will be providing in the city. We will still work to keep the city safe as anything else. Fire will continue to put out fires, and DPW will continue to pick up garbage, clean the streets, take care of the parks, take care of the sewers, trim trees. But will there be reduced services? Absolutely, yes. This furloughs, reduction in staff, a moderate increase in taxes on the homeowners, cutting of expenditures and pushing of revenues. We're asking for everyone to do a little bit in their part. Everything cannot be done on the backs of employees. The whole burden cannot be put on our homeowners, because if we put a double-digit increase on our homeowners, we're going to put many people at risk for losing their homes. So we're asking for everyone to work with us in this year of 2021 to get through this critical time. We're asking on the comptroller to step forward, and if there's information that she can contribute to making this budget better and reducing the impact of furloughs and layoffs, then she needs to bring that forward as the chief fiscal officer. We can't prove what we don't have access to. City council members doing the same thing. So we're going to continue with our slides right now. So right here, if you look at the assessed valuation of the properties, assessed valuation means really how much all of the properties in Mount Vernon, whether owned by the city or our residents, are worth. And this is what we build our tax base on. In 2006, we see that the assessed valuation of the city of Mount Vernon was $165,482,489. If we go right now to 2021, the assessed valuation has sharply declined down to $146,570,778. That is a decrease in our valuation, for which we build our tax base off of over $18 million. That is a real decrease. And that's one of the major and steadiest decreases that we've seen in our revenues over the years. And that's very hard to recover from. We have to do a reevaluation of all of the properties in Mount Vernon. We anticipate that that will cost $1 million. That is money that we don't have right now, but each year, because of these decreased valuations, we give back in tax revenues almost $2.5 million to people who are challenging their tax bills. So this is definitely a very crippling impact on our city and on our budget, but it is a reality.
And I think May also it's important to emphasize the fact that each year, and for the last, I don't know how many years, the city has not budgeted appropriately for those tax certiorars. And so, so that has created even a more of a challenge for the city. How does the assessed valuation kind of work in simple terms for the public? That the lower the tax valuation, it translates to the higher because it has that direct effect upon it when you start to calculate what you will determine as the tax rate. And so, a reevaluation needs to occur. We also got some other work to do to try to continue to improve the value of Mount Vernon. And so when you start to hear things, and I know that there's some questions about development, when you start to think about development in Mount Vernon, that development in Mount Vernon has to be strategic. The mayor has already talked about making sure that we have a comprehensive plan committee together. We've started to work on that. We've started to also partner with experts, that are at places that are at Hunter and at Pace to be able to help us to do it and to do it right. Because we want to also be on the side of doing business in developing Mount Vernon in a way that it benefits Mount Vernon, but it also increases the valuation of our properties in Mount Vernon and doesn't drive money out of Mount Vernon.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Next slide. So, interestingly enough, as we've stated, that the revenues have been over exaggerated and our expenditures have been underestimated for years. And if we look here, we've used the fund balance for years to balance the budget and keep the tax rates low. When you go back to 2006 and 2007, you were using fund balance revenues, fund balances in excess of $6 million to keep tax rates low. And when you look at that, for every $500,000, we're talking about that's 1% of increase or decrease on your tax rate. And so if we're using $7 million, that's really a hidden 14% tax increase. And so the tax increases in Mount Vernon have only been kept relatively low because of great use of fund balance. So when you, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we used over $5 million each year in fund balance to try and balance out that money. When you get to 2011 and 12, it dips below $4 million because I'm sure by then we had expended so much of our fund balance. In 2014 and 15, fund balance wasn't there. 2016, 17, and 18, we started to use the fund balance again. But in 2019 and 2020, no fund balance was used to balance the budget. And in 2021, we are looking to use $2 million in what we believe should be in the fund balance to at least keep the tax rate below 4%. This is a big challenge. In years past, they've had access to fund balances. In years past, we've had access to being able to go out and borrow money through the bond market. Those two options are just not available to us in the city of Mount Vernon in a major way. And so we are between a rock and a hard place. We talk about that term, but we're between a rock and a rock. And this is very real. It's not politically popular. Trust me, if I wanted to be popular, I would just make fake adjustments and continue to move numbers around and hope for the best. But if in July, all of a sudden, we really have no money in the bank and we're moving towards bankruptcy or insolvency, that wouldn't be popular. Then the conversation would be that the mayor was irresponsible and did not make the hard decisions that needed to be made because they want to remain popular. I'm telling you right now, I value my reputation as an executive. I value the education. I value over 30 years of work experience that I have. And I am here to make responsible decisions. And these responsible decisions, unfortunately, are very hard and they are not popular at all. But in the long run, unfortunately, because they have not been made in the past, and because we've just put out budgets that were not necessarily substantively true, we are where we are at this time, making very, very hard decisions. And this is different than any other year because never have we experienced in our lifetimes a pandemic that has impacted our not only our local economy, but our state and our federal and our worldwide economy. So we don't have partners right now to bail us out of a financial situation. And so we have some very hard realities that we have to deal with.
So Mayor, before you move from this slide, I think that it's important to look at 2018. And I think, and to highlight that, because 2018 was a 0% tax increase, right? And the use of the fund balance was a little bit over 6% of that. Or
5.5 million.
Yeah, $5.5 million. Now, that was good and for the tax payers in 2018. But it was not necessarily good for the taxpayers for 19, 20, or 21, right? Nor was it, nor could we say that it was necessarily good for the capital improvements and infrastructure work that kind of needed to be done. That typically may have come, especially in areas in which you don't have a bond rating and able to go out to bond for it, but also would have given you some cash reserve for you to be able to utilize for some of those infrastructure things in which the city is, the residents of the city are crying to be addressed, right? And so understand that that's the balancing game in all of this. And oftentimes as executives and elected officials, collectively, we've got to think about what's the future look like and what the future could potentially be. If nothing else, COVID of 20 should teach anyone who is running for office, anyone who is currently in office, should teach them that you gotta be able to have a vision and preparation and planning for the future. You always got to plan for a reserve, for God forbid something should happen in the city going forward. And so that's something I wanted to highlight because that's unique. And I say that because not only I was talking to a man in the cab the other day about Mount Vernon and the tax rates and all of that, and he didn't even understand that a good portion of his taxes, the majority of his taxes, were in school. And the school has had 0% increases for several years. That's kicking the can down the road. Sooner or later, we're going to be dealing with those kinds of things. So just keep that in mind when you start to hear from administrations and electeds about how do you craft the budget that is responsible for this year and for the years to come.
And I think it's really important that you said that because most people don't understand it, especially if they don't own a home and they're not paying taxes. 70 cents on a dollar of our taxes, almost 70 cents, somewhere between 65 and 70 cents on a dollar of tax money paid in the city of Mount Vernon goes to the school district. The balance is split between the city of Mount Vernon and also sent to the county. So Mount Vernon honestly is operating on about 20 cents of every tax dollar that our homeowners and our residential and our commercial taxpayers are paying in taxes here in the city of Mount Vernon. It is a very, very thin margin for us to operate on, and it will continue to be a challenge until we as the city of Mount Vernon develop and expand our revenue base. 87% of our revenues are coming right now from residential taxpayers. And that is very, very difficult. And we cannot continue to balance the budget on the backs of them, nor can we continue to cut, furlough, and decrease our already very thin staff. So this is not just a challenge for this year, but these are hard conversations that we have to have going forward as well. Next slide. So as we've talked about, the first option would be to furlough everyone here in the city of Mount Vernon for 15 days, or preferably 6 hours per pay period. But that is an option that has to be agreed upon by our four collective bargaining units. And that is the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, Local 107, which is the Independent Association of Firefighters, International Association of Firefighters, our Civilian Service Employee Association, CSEA, as well as Teamsters 456. And so really, as we're looking at the layoffs here in the city of Mount Vernon, just like we said, 64% of 64% of salaries come out of public safety, and combine that is police and fire. So as you see here, the layoffs, 66% of layoffs would come from police and fire. So we show the detail here in police, 24 FTEs, 24 full-time employees being eliminated from the police department. That's 40%. The police department salary percentage for the city of Mount Vernon was 38%. Fire department, it would be 17 full-time employees in the fire department that would be laid off, eliminated, and that is 26%. The mayor's office, there would be an elimination. I have 4 positions here. Clerk's office, elimination of a position. Law department, elimination of a city attorney. Management services, an elimination of a position. DPW, there would be elimination of 11 positions. That's 18% of the layoffs. They have 17% of the salary. OEM, layoff. Office of the Aging, layoff. Youth Bureau, layoff. Planning Department, layoff. So the layoffs would happen all throughout the city of Mount Vernon. No one except really only, I think, Human Resources, which has 2 people in their department. Human Resources, the Veterans Department, which has 1 person in the department. We have several departments, the Assessor's Office. Those departments right now are not included in this because those departments would be totally eliminated if we laid people off. We have 2 people in Human Resources to operate a city of 700 employees. Between the 33 vacant positions that we eliminated and the 60 positions that we would have to lay off, this is going to be a serious reduction in our workforce, bringing us down from about 700 budgeted employees down to just a little bit above 600 budget employees. So we will experience an impact in the services that we are providing. I think that's self-explanatory. This is the last thing that we want to do, but we may not have an option if furloughs are not.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I might have missed it, but you did emphasize the fact that we already in the budget presented took out 32 positions, right? So
33 positions, I believe we took out. So we already took out 33 positions.
Yeah.
And so when people talk about that we budgeted for positions or we over budgeted for 2020, there are positions, we could not have eliminated these vacant positions if they were filled. We passed the budget last year on February 24th. I came in, there was no budget. We crafted a budget. We passed it on February 24th. Within 2 weeks, we were beginning to see the impact of COVID. As of March 16th, I believe that's when the state of emergency went into effect. And there are positions that we deliberately kept open, understanding that there would be a decrease in revenues. We had no idea on March 16th when the state went on pause that we would be on pause through the end of the year. But we did understand that there were some positions that we would need to keep open because there could be some revenues that were lost. There were other positions that were left open that we really needed to fill in public safety and in DPW because they were critical services, and because of no civil service exams, because there were not academies being given in police and fire at that time. We ran with high vacancy rates, which forced us to operate in an inefficient fiscal manner because we had to give more overtime. Overtime was also utilized heavily when we had lots of people out for COVID and you had other people who had to quarantine because they had been exposed. So these were people who had to stay home mandatorily, and we still had to fill the need to pick up the garbage, to police the streets, to put out fires, to respond to over 12,000 calls in the fire department. That's a challenge. So
I think Malcolm said there's some questions.
There's some questions, yes, but I just wanted to make sure that we stated some of that because there was a question. They said, you put all of these things, you overspent your budget. We actually left positions open and know that we had a savings in vacant positions, and some positions that we didn't fill until July or September, we had a savings of over $1.7 million. So I just wanted to make sure that the word and the narrative that's out there is accurate.
No, actually, absolutely. I mean, and some of those decisions were done strategically because of that. I mean, and folks have doubled up. I mean, for example, I've doubled up in doing basically almost 2 jobs, right? In order to try to get us through what we need to get through. So absolutely. What's this question?
It says, do you think the percentage on property tax will go higher than what was already predicted for the 2021 budget? So, right now, this is the budget that I've presented. It will go to a public hearing on this Thursday. Based on the public hearing, there might be some minimal adjustments that are made. We didn't make a lot of adjustments after the public hearing last year, but then it goes to the city council. At that time, the city council does not add to the budget, they can only reduce. And so the question is, if they reduce, where will they reduce? Will they reduce further in expenditures? Will they reduce and look to reduce some of the revenues? And if they reduce some of the revenues, then there will also be greater cuts, or it could result in a higher tax increase. That is out of my hands. I've done my part on the budget right now. It has not been done in isolation, just with the administrative staff. We have worked with and sat down with all of the council members, and they have participated in varying levels in putting this budget together and weighing in on the budget, their concerns, their suggestions, their adjustments. The comptroller has provided some numbers, especially in the areas of benefits. And one of the biggest numbers that she contributed was a $3.5 million difference in what has been budgeted over the past few years in 2018, 2019, and 2020 for medical expenses. And that number jumped from $18.5 million to $22 million. And that is one of the main driving changes in the budget that we presented on December 29th and the budget that we presented on just this past Wednesday. A $3.5 million increase in what we are budgeting for medical expenses. And so what we're looking, that's something we have to make up. And thus, the furloughs of 15 days will save us $3.1 million. Layoffs of 60 positions will save us about $2.89 million, almost $2.9 million. So that is really the big driving change. It says, is there a day for staggering 15 days across employees in the departments? Yes, we've already said that we are looking to stagger this so that it only impacts the employees 6 hours per pay period, 6 hours per pay period between the months of March and December. Will departments be able to maintain current service levels? We've answered that and we've responded to that over and over. Furloughs will be able to have more consistent service levels, but if we have to go and have no other option than to lay off 60 people, which are deep cuts on top of eliminating 33 vacant positions, there will be impacts in our service levels. Absolutely. There is no way that we can say reducing a workforce by 100 employees will not change service levels. If it didn't, then it meant that we were overbloated, and we're not overbloated. We've been thinly staffed. Okay. Other questions that I may not have seen, that we may not have answered, Malcolm? Not seeing anything. Okay, so there are no other questions. So again, this is not a bluff. This is not a political ploy. This is not a way to get the community or the staff afraid. These are very real realities. As we've said, there's been overestimations of revenues and underestimation of expenditures for years, just to make sure people could stay under a tax cap or that the budget was digestible. Underestimation and overtime. And as you said, Chief Morton, especially tertiaries, I think we've budgeted for tax refunds at $500,000 a year, but what we absolutely see is more like 2 million to 2.5 million a year. And those are not optional. When the court says that we have to return over assessments, then we have to return that money. Kelly Scott says, are there any plans to bring in retail? We are definitely having those discussions as we are working with several developers on apartment buildings. They're mixed use apartment buildings. And so those come with retail plans for the ground level. We are looking at plans to redo 4th Avenue. But right now, when it comes to retail and restaurants, it's a big challenge because even when you're looking at restaurants, you have to now budget for COVID and keep, if you have occupancy or square footage for 100, you might only be able to seat 50. So, businesses right now, there's a lot of hesitation around opening businesses and expanding businesses until there's a little more stability around COVID and what's happening.
I think
Have conversations. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Have conversations started with the state on what city needs to do to get additional funding? Absolutely, Anitra. We're speaking to Biagi, to Bailey, to Pretlow. These are conversations that we are having. We are speaking to the governor's regional representatives and all the way up to the governor's office. We're speaking with the state comptroller's office. But the state is experiencing a shortfall also. I know that the governor put something out the other day that he is hoping to get $350 billion from Washington, D.C. But that is not money that is here yet. If that is money that comes in and that money trickles down to Mount Vernon and we're able to advocate for it, then we'll be able to reduce furlough days, or we'll be able to bring some of these critical positions back online. But a hope and a wish and kind of political chatter right now does not deal with the impending, I guess, critical need to make these decisions now. We cannot send out tax bills until we have an adopted budget. If we're not able, the longer we wait to adopt a budget, the longer it will be before we send out tax bills, and that means Mount Vernon has no revenue. As we said, 87% of the revenues coming into Mount Vernon are based on our tax receipts. And if we cannot even send out a bill to be paid, we won't have revenues, and Mount Vernon won't experience a reduction in services. We will experience a financial cliff and a shutdown of government. When will the comptroller present a budget? We haven't heard anything from her. We have, look, we put it out there. We presented a very preliminary budget back in December. We said to the comptroller, to council, and to anyone else who was concerned or felt they had more financial information or more financial expertise to please weigh in. If she wanted to present a budget, she could have presented a budget by now. We sent out an email on January 6th to the comptroller and to the council asking for more input on the budget that we presented on December 29th. We received some input from council members, and we sent out another email to the comptroller on January 12th for input that we still hadn't received. And she gave us, like we said, additional numbers around benefits to the tune of an increase of 3.5 million just for medical benefits, and also an increase for retirement. And so that's some of the drastic shifts that we had to make in the budget. Those are not numbers that we receive from the state. Those numbers have to come directly through her. So, I welcome Comptroller Reynolds and anyone who she's working with to please, if you have a budget, if you have information that we are not reflecting, please feel free to bring one forward, because this is a critical juncture in the operation of our city, and we don't need anyone sitting on the sidelines criticizing. We need everyone to be on the field, because we don't have multiple teams in Mount Vernon. We need to have one team, because this is one community, and only as one team can we make the responsible and the best decisions for the city of Mount Vernon. It says, how can we get a listing of properties that are for sale, both residential and commercial? We will work with our real estate committee to get that out, the list of properties that are currently available. Our assessor has that information, and she sits on the real estate committee.
Yeah, about the revenues. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think we do have to be creative. I think in some of the areas, we also have to figure out, how do we build small business in Mount Vernon? I think we've started that already, some initiatives. But looking out there and trying to find out what other communities like ours are doing in order to strengthen our small business community, because our small business community also helped to float us during this economic time. Of course, in addition to internet sales, and we know that folks have been making a lot of internet sales. And so over the next few months, we'll be hearing more about trying to pull together businesses. I just had a conversation with our director of business development and compliance on Friday about trying to pull together at least some sort of focus group, some sort of kind of business, group, that brainstorming group, to begin to think about how do we actually do this? What do they need in order for us to be able to build the economy around their businesses?
And like you said, we met with our IDA and our director of business development and compliance just last week. The businesses that we have, the small businesses that we have in Mount Vernon, range from very entry-level entrepreneur to, much more sophisticated businesses. And so we are partnering with Small Business Development Administration, some of our local colleges, and some business development organizations to enhance the capacity of our small businesses so that they can be more competitive, so that they can offer a wider selection of services, so that they could move from just an in-person and an in-store platform to expand their online platform and reach people that are across the country and be able to grow their business. So we are doing a lot of work to expand the capacity of our small businesses. Our small businesses are a critical element in our community. Mount Vernon, we don't necessarily have the physical space to have big malls at this time. And honestly, the communities that have big malls, they're not seeing the type of rebound in their economy and in their sale taxes, because a lot of people are going, they're not looking to go to the big malls. It took longer for the malls to reopen. People are still kind of shy about malls, and a lot of people are doing a lot of online purchasing. And so we are really looking with our small retail associations to build their online presence and help them identify new products that we can bring to Mount Vernon. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Yes, the rental space is very high for a depressed area, but that's one of the challenges. We don't own those properties. Those properties are owned by private landlords, and they determine the market value. And so we see a lot of small businesses open, hoping that they can keep pace with those expenses. We see grand openings and quiet closings. So I think that we have answered most of the questions out there. There was one question asking, are we laying off people in the comptroller's office? She's an elected official. I can't make decisions about layoffs in her office. The council has worked with us, and I have oversight over the rest of the departments outside of the comptroller's office, and the council has oversight over the council and the clerk's office. And so together we've made decisions around that. And that's what we'll say for right now. I want to keep this as minimally political as it is. This is too important to politicize this. But this is where we are, Mount Vernon. It is very hard time. We are between a rock and a rock. We have to make very hard decisions. We have to finalize this budget, and we have to be able to get tax bills out to the city. And we have to make sure that whether we're doing furloughs or we're doing layoffs, that we're working especially with public safety and DPW to identify alternative operational plans so that we can maintain as many services at a high level that we can here in the city of Mount Vernon. So thank you so much, Chief Morton. Yes?
Yeah, I think that it's important, just as we end, to highlight just a few things as people go away and do their own homework and study the budget, right? Is first of all to recognize that the revenues that traditionally have come into the city are not coming in at the same rate that was expected. Also, recognize that we know that some of those revenues actually were overstated, and so therefore the shortfall is even greater because of that. The other is that, of course, the state aid has dropped about 20%. As we come into this new year. I think it's also important for the public to remember that we already eliminated 30 some odd positions already out of the budget that were vacant from last year to this year. So therefore, we've tried to minimize kind of the fallout of those who are currently working that would affect the services that are going to be given to the residents of Mount Vernon. We also have looked for other streams of revenue that may potentially come in. We've also tried to offset some of the revenue generating positions and positions that specifically work with some of the CARES Act money that will help the community with grant funds. So you will see, for example, in the budget that the planning department's staffing has increased significantly, but you'll also notice if you look over to the side that it says grant funding, which means that the money is coming into the city to cover that expense. I don't want you to think that while we're talking about cuts, we're adding staff. No, we're adding specific staff to do specific programs that are related to federal and non-federal grant funding programs, and they're covering the cost of their salaries and their benefits for those.
And it's important to say in the midst of that, Chief Morton, that these are restricted funds. I don't want people to think that funds coming in from HUD or funds coming in from the AG's office can be applied to police and fire. They are not funds that can be used for some of those positions in public safety. They are positions specifically, this money is specifically assigned
for homeless programs,
for homeless outreach, for small business development and things of that nature, for code enforcement and building inspections, and it is restricted to that purpose. So when we talk about grant monies coming in, grant monies are used for specific purposes and they're already prescribed by the funder. So we do not have the liberty or the authority to just shift that money around. So I want to make sure, because most people are very concerned with public safety and say, well, just use those grant monies to fund firefighters or police officers or DPW, and we don't have the liberty to do that.
Right, and good point to be emphasized. And so my last, I guess, encouragement to the residents is to make sure that you carefully look at the budget and don't just look at parts of it and then begin to criticize the parts of it without looking at the budget in its totality and looking at the actual expenses, but also looking at the revenues and doing some real critical kind of analysis yourself as to how you balance your budget in your house, how you balance your budget at your job, and the challenges that sometimes that you have with that, and recognize that it's just not a whimsical kind of a process in the midst of this, right? Is the budget perfect? Absolutely not. Is any budget perfect? Absolutely not. But we're working to do the very best that we can to ensure that the services continue in Mount Vernon at a level that is acceptable, that the fallout of the individual, that the fallout of the staffing being laid off or furloughed is minimal, and that we maximize any potential of revenue that may very well come through the city. That's what we're doing. And so again, any questions that you have, of course, May is available. Again, I'm her chief of staff, so I'm available to answer any questions. Most people who send an email, I try to respond as much as I possibly can, as quickly to get you the answers for what you need to make an intelligent decision, and do that in preparation for the 28th. Do that in preparation for the 28th, to come prepared to have, critical questions, but also to have healthy dialogue about where we need to go.
And since we just finished MLK Day, not too long ago, really just last weekend, one of the things that he said, we're either going to rise and strive together as brothers, or we're going to perish as fools. We cannot make this about politics. This is not about popularity and doing the things that are popular. Right now, if I was going to do something to remain popular, like we said, we would just fudge some numbers, would push through a budget that's not realistic, and we would crash and burn. We just don't have some of those luxuries. We're not able to do that right now. As executives, we know that it is not the responsible thing to do. So it is political season, and lots of people are talking and saying things on the internet. But the question is, will you be able, when you sit in a seat, to make the very hard and the honest and the unpopular decisions that you know are best for the community? Or will you just cave into political pressures and try and remain popular? This is not popular. We're making hard decisions, but they are the reality. And it is the practical decisions that we have to make right now for the city of Mount Vernon. Thank you, Dr. Morton. Thank you, Mount Vernon. We know we took longer than usual, but this was a very important discussion to have. Please, we will be back on Wednesday with our public safety departments and our DPW departments to talk about how we are preparing and looking at some operational changes in light of furloughs or layoffs, and continue to answer questions around the budget. And then on Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m., we will have a budget hearing. Here, there will be limited people allowed in live in the city council room chambers to come in and make comments. I ask that you only come if you're going to stand and make comments. You will have, 2 to 3 minutes to make your comments on the budget. If you just want to watch it and view it, then we will be providing a Zoom link for people to be able to either come into a Zoom, or you could watch it on Facebook Live, and we will try and address some of those questions. We still have to follow COVID mandates. And so unfortunately, everyone who may want to come will not be able to come, but we want to make sure that we are responding to the concerns of the community. Thank you so much. And as Maria said, she'd rather swallow some hard truths than be fed sweet lies. And that's what we are looking to do. Thank you so much for understanding that. God bless you, everyone, and have a good night. Be well.